and welcome to another live chapter reading of Raven Woman's Tavern by Koerber, brought to you by Itsy Bitsy Book Bits. Prologue, Raven. Most white people think the story of Warrentown started with the loggers, but that isn't true. The story started with Raven. Well, if you go back far enough, it started with creation, but it was Raven who many millennia ago lit on a tree branch overlooking the curve of the river and gave the place a name. She called it home. That's it. That's the whole story. Raven landed in the river valley, found it good, and called it home. That's not much of a story, but she didn't call the valley home because anything in particular happened there. She just found what she needed: food, water, protection from the weather, and companionship. She was able to raise raven babies there from her series of relationships. Ravens loved deeply, but in succession. She was happy most of the time in her home, not singing and dancing and laughing her head off, of course. Just content, and sometimes more than that. Sometimes she experienced the most precious of all emotions, grateful delight. She was delighted by the first silly flights of her children. She was delighted by the long golden beams of evening light that made the meadow grass glow with an orange on green. She was delighted by the feel of wind under her wings and by the silvery glisten of raindrops on the needles of the cedars. She was delighted by her lovers for as long as the love lasted. Many things delighted Raven, even the relentless pounding of winter rain. She shared the bend in the river with people who had their own name for the little meadow in the valley. They called it Fish Camp because they came up in the fall for the salmon. Raven delighted in the fish guts they left on the grass. She also liked to eavesdrop on the stories they told their children. And to her delight, some of the stories were about her. She wasn't delighted by death, but she knew it was the price paid for life. Some people came and went. Animals came and went. Fish came and went. Plants came and went. Raven watched and loved and said goodbye when the time came. And so her daily story repeated for many, many years. Days of eating, procreating, raising children, feeling delighted, and sleeping with a grateful heart. And saying goodbye when the time came. But then, one day, strangers pushed a dirt road up the valley and chopped down the trees. The cedars were ancient, some as much as 500 years old, but it only took a team of timber beasts a couple hours to saw one down. They attacked the trees in teams, chopping and sawing until one at a time, the great cedars were murdered. If Raven had known what was coming, she might have chosen to die. Instead, she fought. She caused accidents. She led loggers into the woods and left them to die of hypothermia. She made them careless, encouraged drunkenness, and led them to whorehouses so they'd get diseases. But the timber beasts just kept coming. The bosses didn't care how many got chewed up by the accidents or died. The men were replaceable, no matter how many of them cut off their own hands or dropped trees on each other. The bosses always found more to send into the woods. And the loggers got more organized. The company built a sawmill and improved the road. A collection of little cottages appeared to house the sawmill workers. Little businesses moved in. Horses were replaced by trucks. Power lines replaced the old oil lamps, and a school was built. They called the place Warrentown, after the man who owned the sawmill. After a millennia of living, the ancient forest was killed in less than 100 years. It was replaced by a forest of young trees, cut on a cycle of mere decades. The first people, the animals, the plants, and the birds were pushed into smaller living spaces or died. Meanwhile, the people of the town were proud of what they'd accomplished. They had lots of stories about the old days, by which they meant when the loggers first appeared. They had tales of fights, accidents, and deaths, but also of building, growing, and settling. Their lives were, in many ways, like the ravens. They ate, they procreated, they slept, and they sometimes felt delight. They prayed with gratitude to a God that they believed was on their side. They didn't see destruction. They thought they were building a future for their children. They weren't. Raven watched them from her retreat in the woods. Unlike many of her friends and neighbors, she had the choice of staying because she was adaptable. She hated the raw, boring, sterile new forest, but she could survive. So Raven watched the town, and after a while, she got to know many of the town's people. She even grew to like some of them. However, she didn't like any of them well enough to follow them when they left. And leave they did, most of them, when the mill closed. The trees had been over-harvested, the corporation sought profits elsewhere, and the town died. The people, after killing everything around them, had brought destruction on themselves. Raven got a bitter satisfaction out of that. But the end of the town was only a symptom of the larger problem. Changes came, an accelerating cascade of changes set in motion by the people over 100 years previously. The climate grew warmer and threw everything out of whack. The winters were more rainy and the summers hotter and drier. Fleas proliferated. Many of the remaining cedars and hemlocks died. The migrant birds no longer arrived, and the spring was nearly silent. The forest animals, ravaged by fleas, disease, and hunger, could no longer raise families and died out. The orca starved as the fisheries collapsed. The raven watched the devastation with the courage of despair. Her world, the world of delight and gratitude, was driven away by chaos. But she could fly. And when she flew high enough into the sky, she could see that the river remained, as did the hills, the rocks, and the rain. The sunset still sent golden beams across the meadows and glowed on the skeletal forests. The night, soft and comforting, obscured the sins of the people. The valley of the river bend was her place and remained her vantage point for watching the world. Animals, plants, and people came and went, but Raven stayed. Chapter 1. Rachel and Jimmy go into the Rainier to shop. They did a drive-by, rolling along just beneath the speed limit. There wasn't much traffic in town, just a few bicyclists, a motorcycle, and an electrical delivery truck. Their old-style hybrid car stood out, which was bad, but there was nothing they can do about it. Jimmy drove while Rachel checked out the pharmacy parking lot and the parking spaces in front of the adjacent stores. They saw no sign of the militia. Jimmy popped the blinker on, and they turned the corner, giving Rachel a view of the pharmacy's solid windowless wall. He hit the blinker again, and they turned into the grocery store parking lot behind the pharmacy. It was 6 o'clock and near closing time for most businesses. Jimmy navigated through the grocery parking around to the far side of the pharmacy and parked where their car couldn't be seen from the pharmacy's back door. They got out and strode casually around to the front of the building. Though they were trying to look inconspicuous, they were a striking couple. Rachel was short, lithe, and dark, while Jimmy was as lean and sharp-eyed as a sheep-killing dog. They ambled together through the front parking lot of the pharmacy, shared with its neighbor businesses. The one functioning shop, a secondhand store, was just closing. They picked up their pace and hit the door of the pharmacy just as the clerk inside was preparing to close up. Jimmy strong-armed the door and strode in. The clerk, a young woman, startled but friendly, almost staggered to get out of his way. Jimmy took a quick scan of the interior as Rachel flipped the sign to close. The clerk stuttered. "Can I help you?" "We're the last customers," Rachel told her. She smiled to the clerk's confused gaze and repeated firmly, "You're closed now, and we're the last customers." "All clear," said Jimmy. He pulled his gun out from the back of his jeans and pointed it at the clerk. Her wide-eyed gaze went from startled to frightened, and her mouth opened. Before she could scream, Rachel locked eyes with her and stated firmly, "You are going to close your mouth and stay calm. And you now are going to lock the door." She backed up her words with a focused thought. "Shut up and lock the door." The clerk swallowed hard and clamped her mouth shut. Still round-eyed, she fumbled with the key in the lock. Rachel and Jimmy knew that the pharmacy had one clerk out front and a pharmacist and tech in the back. They also knew that the front door was out of sight from the back, blocked by stacks of shelves loaded with sundries, over-the-counter medicines, and candy. Rachel took the young woman's arms and told her, "We're going to the back now. You will not speak. We aren't going to hurt you if you follow directions." "Yup," Jimmy told her. "This is a stick-up, so get moving." They marched to the back of the store. The pharmacist, a thin white man of middle age, was frowning at a computer screen on the far side of a counter. Behind him, in the stacks of medicines, someone was whistling aimlessly. They heard the rip of a cardboard box being opened. Jimmy held the pistol up and barked, "Hey!" to get the pharmacist's attention. What?" Understanding dawned on the pharmacist's face and his mouth dropped open. "Be calm," Rachel told him. "Don't resist. Call your help and come out here." "There's no one," he stuttered, his eyes darting around. "Yeah, there is. Do it." Jimmy's voice was knife sharp. The pharmacist cleared his throat and called, "Joni?" "Huh?" Joni emerged, a short, round, white woman with gray hair and thick glasses. She saw the gun and came to an abrupt halt. "Okay, everyone," Rachel said. "I've got a simple direction for you to follow. Place your hands on the counter and keep them flat. Got that, everyone?" They all just stared, too scared to move. Jimmy snapped, "Is there anything in the place worth dying for?" 3 pairs of frightened eyes blinked at him. "So get those hands on the counter." They complied, the 2 clerks shakily, the pharmacist with his lips compressed in disapproval. Rachel pulled a black garbage bag out of the pouch of her sweatshirt. Moving briskly, she worked her way down the aisle toward the front of the store, scooping Band-Aids, toothpaste, over-the-counter painkillers, and vitamins into her bag. She hit the cash registers and cleaned the money out of the till, her fingers quick and efficient. Then she paused, her attention snagged by the glittering display of Halloween-themed keyrings and jewelry draped over a plastic statue of a witch. Rachel's hands hovered over the witch. Then she snatched it up, shook it until the necklaces and keyrings fell off, and dumped it headfirst into her bag. Conscious that she was taking too much time, she headed at a trot up the personal hygiene aisle, tossing shampoo and soap into her bag on the way. Jimmy watched his 3 hostages while she worked. The older clerk's fingers trembled on the counter, and the younger one's mouth worked incessantly as if she wanted to speak. The pharmacist worried Jimmy a bit. He was visibly seething, and he was clearly planning his call to the militia. Jimmy's mouth was tight with irritation when Rachel finally joined him, hauling her heavy bag. "Now we're coming around to your side." Rachel grabbed the young clerk by the arm and marched her around the back. Jimmy followed, keeping the gun aimed in their direction. "Okay, almost done," Rachel told them. "We need some antibiotics, some painkillers, and some of your meds for crazy people. Then we're going out the back door. Lead the way." They pushed the pharmacy staff along in a little herd through the maze of stacks, while Rachel grabbed the bottles and boxes and tossed them into her bulging bag. "Done now," Rachel sang out cheerfully. "Back door," Jimmy told them. "Move." He made the staff sit on the floor along the walls beside the back door. Rachel pulled a roll of black electrician's tape out of her pouch and taped their hands and feet. They'd get free in a few minutes. All she really wanted was to slow them down. Jimmy stood by the door with his hands on the knob. He shoved the door open the minute Rachel finished taping the last pair of hands. Rachel directed her black eyes at each frightened face in turn and stated firmly, "You will not remember what we look like. You will not be able to describe us." Then, black bag bouncing at her heels, she followed Jimmy out the door. They walked briskly, but calmly, along the back of the pharmacy and around the corner to their waiting car. Rachel tossed the bag in the trunk and climbed into the back seat. She ducked down out of sight while Jimmy got the car started. He drove carefully right below the speed limit down the main drag. "That was fun," Rachel called from the floor of the back seat. "Stay down, we ain't out of town yet," Jimmy called. I hope you enjoyed tonight's chapter reading of The Raven Woman's Tavern by Koerber. Have a good night.